All right, I guess I lied to you guys. This second show of the day is, in fact, also happening live on YouTube, so not all after the fact. And honest to goodness, I had no intention of doing it this way, but it's actually faster. So, for my own mental health, we're doing it live because that's actually, believe it or not, fewer steps for me to get the shows onto all the different platforms to do it this way. The other way, I have to end up downloading and then re-uploading a very large video file. And this way, it just goes straight out there. I don't know if there's any quality loss on the video side this way. I know it's fine on the audio side because I'm in full control of that the whole way through. But anyway, that's where we're at. Welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball, episode 2 here on August the 1st. We are 1 week away, friends, or so it seems, from the start of Yahoo Leagues. And we will have so much to do on the show. I cannot wait. I've been freaking out about this day since I launched Old Man Squad, the sports network, and the podcast. I guess it's like 2.5 months ago, and it's almost here now. Because, listen, I don't want to put too much pressure on myself or you guys or anything, but I put a lot of eggs into this basket, and the eggs need to hatch this fantasy draft season. That's not to say, a bunch of money needs to come in, but the show, this is the launching point. So, to that end, please do take a moment to like, rate, subscribe. You guys know the deal at this point. Like it on YouTube, subscribe everywhere. Drop a 5-star review if you guys enjoy the pod. I definitely appreciate those as well. Follow me on Twitter at Dan Besbris, DANBESBRIS. And follow at Old Man Squad. That's the network's Twitter account. It is, it's not that far away from 1,000 at this point, which is very, very cool. And it will follow you back also. This second team we're covering today is the Washington Wizards. That's what this show is about. And I'm actually weirdly excited to do a show on the Washington Wizards, which I know it's why are you getting excited about the Washington Wizards? By all accounts, they're going to be terrible again. If anything, you could maybe even argue they got worse season over season with the departure of the guy who actually kind of helped keep their offense in line. But there's fantasy value in there. And that to me is certainly the biggest point of all of this. Is there fantasy value locked up somewhere in Washington? And the answer is, I believe, a resounding yes. First point to make about the Wizards is that you have to make sure your fantasy league settings are going to accommodate the fact that this team is going to be losing hard again. The Wizards were awful last season in almost every respect. Remember, through their first 20 games, 11 of them were blowouts, and it created all this amazing fantasy bubble where guys all looked terrible. Tyus Jones was number 105 because he was averaging 23 minutes a game because he hadn't had to play in any fourth quarters yet on the year. And so there were all these amazing buy low opportunities. But more than anything, it highlighted how terrible the Wizards were. They went 15-67. Yes, they ended up getting Alex Sarr in the draft, which is inarguably a big win when the Hawks went with Risa Shea, and it sounded like Sarr didn't want to be in Atlanta. So Washington kind of caught a break to that end, but they lost Tyus Jones. They traded away Denny Avdia for a veteran who they're probably going to be trying to move again at some point this year or shut down. That's Malcolm Brogdon. And so by all accounts, unless Alex Sarr comes in and makes a huge impact right out of the chute, which is possible, but I don't want to say probable, the Wizards probably are worse season over season or about the same because they also brought in Jonas Valanciunas. Does he help more than he hurts? For a lot of teams, the answer is he hurts more than he helps. In Washington, he probably does help more than hurt. But what this also does, and when I say you got to make sure you got your league settings checked out, number one, you got to have a games cap. If you're playing Roto, you got to have a games cap. Then a lot of these guys in the Wizards end up being kind of useful because you can deploy them until the middle of March. And if they stop playing after that, who cares? You got your 60 some odd games out of the dudes. And you can see it on the board if you're watching along with us on the video side. Kuzma played 70 games in a tanking season last year. Jordan Poole played 78 games in a tanking season last year. The only guy I would argue that maybe could have squeezed out a few more games would be Tyus Jones, who played in 66, kind of accidentally made them somewhat competitive when he was a big part of what was going on there. And he's gone now, replaced by an older, grumpier, broken down version of himself in Malcolm Brogdon, who, by the way, I like Brogdon, but that dude hasn't been healthy in a while either. Let's start with the new guys, and then we'll loop back around to the old guys. Although I guess I should also mention the other league setting I had in mind. That is, if you're on the head-to-head side, make sure your league ends 3 weeks early or more. Okay? I know that the Wizards didn't all get shut down this last year, but that doesn't mean that they won't get shut down again this season, especially if it's one of the veterans who I would classify as Kuzma is a veteran, Valanciunas, who they just brought in, a veteran, Brogdon, who they just traded for, a veteran. Those are your 3 biggest worries. Kuzma, a possible trade candidate. Frankly, all 3 of them possible trade candidates. And then if they're not traded, then dialed down or possibly fully shut down over the season's last 10 to 15 ball games. Okay, you've got your league settings all in order. Now let's talk about the individual players. And let's start with one of the new guys. And he's a big new guy. And that's Jonas Valanciunas, who comes over with an opportunity to invigorate his value in a way that playing for a contending team he felt, seemingly, could not. Because we remember memories, my short-term memories in the basketball space are not great these days. But it wasn't that long ago that the rumor came out, or the report, or whatever you want to call it, that LeBron James was willing to take a pay cut for players like, and it listed like 3 dudes, and one of them was Valanciunas. So the Lakers were all in on getting JV some money, presumably maybe a similar amount to what he ended up getting in Washington, playing not a ton of minutes, obviously the backup center minutes, some alongside AD at the 4 potentially, but not a ton. So, JV was probably looking at about 20-ish minutes a ball game, but important ones because the Lakers have needed rebounding, they've needed size, and he said, nah, you know what? I don't really want to compete for anything at all. I'm going to go to Washington, and I'm going to take not a ton of money. What is he? I think it's like 30 over 3, something like that. So not a huge contract. But I'm going to go play more minutes. I'm going to go get mine. And then if they trade me at the trade deadline, okay, great. I'll still have an opportunity to play for a winning team. Presumably, JV felt like he had an opportunity to show the NBA he's still got a lot left in the tank. I guess it's a little weird that he took a few years, but I think the 3rd year is non-guaranteed and maybe some kind of option. I probably should have dug in on that before I started talking about his contract. But what you can take away from that, however the 3rd year is actually shaking out, is that JV wanted to go to a place where he could just do more. And we can only assume, we don't know for sure, but I think we can safely assume that the Wizards offered him a larger role. Because who the hell is going to pick the Wizards over the Lakers unless they're getting to do more stuff? That has to be the explanation. The nice thing about that is, and I can't figure out if, the 3rd year is not guaranteed. So that one could just get wiped out by whatever team potentially trades for him later this season or next season or something like that. The nice thing about this is that because Valanciunas was so terrible down the stretch this last year, frankly, the whole second half of the season, he pretty much got phased out in New Orleans. I don't think most people remember how good JV is at fantasy basketball when he's getting even a small amount of playing time. And remember, we did a show on this. I forget exactly how long ago. Shortly after free agency started. It was probably like around July What the hell episode was that? It was like July 3rd or 4th. Did a mailbag show on July 4th. I don't remember exactly what day it was in there, but it was shortly after free agency started. We talked about JV in fairly excruciating detail, and I don't think I want to go quite that far down the same rabbit hole today. But the main takeaways from that Valanciunas deep dive was that not only did his minutes get severely shaved during the second half of this most recent season, and really the last 25 games or so, when Valanciunas was only playing 19 minutes per ball game, but his usage got shaved on top of that. So it was like an exponential drop off. It was a double whammy of sorts. And you guys know me, I like to sort of fuzzy math it on these podcasts, but I'm willing to admit that that's the case. Without getting into the exact specifics of like how he ends up with or without the basketball in a given play, you can just look at teammates. And for Valanciunas, you look around and say, who am I comfortable taking shots from? And on the Wizards, the answer is literally all of them. JV is a much more efficient basketball player than anybody else on that team. Kyle Kuzma would probably be the other one you'd kind of bow to a little bit. Brogdon coming in is decently efficient, not great, not like the 50, 40, 90 year for him or close to it in Milwaukee. It was a long time ago now. And certainly not Jordan Poole. So you're going to see not only a minutes uptick for JV, but also a usage uptick in the minutes he's on the floor. I would say that the Valanciunas you're getting in his new digs here out in Washington will be perhaps a little bit more like the earlier season Valanciunas you got this most recent year in New Orleans. Perhaps not quite to that extreme, but by the way, it's worth noting his usage wasn't that high the first part of the year. He was just playing 28 minutes. I don't think he gets to 28 minutes in Washington. I think you're looking at a JV that's going to get around 24 or 25. They'll have Marvin Bagley and Rashawn Holmes floating around in the wings to pick up the other center minutes if they wanted to go. If they wanted to run any Sar at center, they could, although I think they'd rather play him at the 4, which would then move Kuzma down to the 3. It's a very weird lineup, which is why I don't think you can expect more than that for Valanciunas, because they're just like, there's too many bigger bodies in Washington, and like at least 2 to 3 of them need to be getting into a ball game in some capacity, but also maybe don't fit all that great together. So that's why I think you got to look at like something in the 22 to 26 range. And so that's why I'm kind of splitting the difference and saying 24. But 24 minutes of Valanciunas with him getting around 10 shots in those 24 minutes, that's probably still enough to get him into that 65 to 75 range. And I'm betting he gets drafted back of that. So JV is very much a target for me this coming season in fantasy basketball. I'm very curious what his pre-rank looks like on Yahoo. I'm very curious how other analysts feel about him and what that does to his pre-rank or his actual draft position. But, you know, you heard it here for the second time on this show. I would say all in, but I'm pretty hard in on Valanciunas this coming season in Washington. The other guy that's new to the proceedings, besides Alex Sarr, who I guess we have to talk about at some point, would be Malcolm Brogdon, who, when he played with Portland this last year, 39 out of the 82 games, so not often, he played 29 minutes, averaged about 16, 4, and 5.5. Not much in the way of defensive stats, kind of low field goal, decent free throw percentage, and 2 3-pointers a ball game. This is one to me that's really hanging in the balance. I don't know as of this moment, August the 1st, if Malcolm Brogdon is going to be the starting point guard for the Washington Wizards or if they're going to choose to go big, which would basically mean going point guardless, and Jordan Poole would effectively be the point guard. I don't know who your choice would be. Well, I guess you could potentially go Brogdon, Poole, Kuzma, Sarr, and Valanciunas as your 5. That's not completely out of the realm of possibility. You put in all three of the new guys with Poole and Kuzma. Then you sort of get to the question of who should jump over them. I don't think Koulibaly has shown himself to be a guy that definitely needs a starting spot. I mean, Corey Kispert needs to be a starter. Sadiq Bey's out for most of the season before he would come back and potentially push one of these guys. So, yeah, I guess you could. I mean, I think you could make a decent case that the starting five for the Wizards, I don't know why I didn't have this written down, would be Brogdon, basically picking up the Tyus Jones role, then Poole, Poole reprise, Kuzma and Sarr. I don't know which one's the 3 and which one's the 4 between those dudes, and then Valanciunas at the 5. That's an okay, at least from a fantasy standpoint, starting lineup. What does it mean for Brogdon in terms of what he gets to do in the fantasy side? I'd be a little bit concerned about it because dude took almost 13 shots a game when he was playing for Portland last year. I don't know that 13 shots are available in Washington. Because Portland had an even uglier distribution. Anthony Simons was out for a long stretch. So was Jeremy Grant. Although I don't know how much that overlapped with the Brogdon absences. But basically, these guys were getting all these shots because their teammates were all cooked. There was like a week where all the actual usage guys on Portland were healthy at the same time. But the Wizards, their main dudes were largely healthy last year. So you slot Brogdon in there behind Kuzma's 19 shots and Poole's 15 shots. Avdia being gone helps a little bit. But you bring in Sarr, and it's not like they're just going to sit him and say, here, you take 6 or 7 shots. So what's left for Brogdon? 10, 11? The problem with Malcolm that Tyus Jones doesn't have is that Brogdon is not a good defensive stat guy, and his field goal percent has been sort of steadily on the downtick since that hyper-efficient year alongside Giannis and Chris Middleton seemingly 25 years ago, which makes Brogdon, at least on the 9-cat side, kind of a difficult sell job, meaning like he took 13 shots a game last year, almost 12.7, and he still was only number 125 because the field goal percent was painfully low and the defensive stats were painfully low. And he got you 16, 4, and 5 with 2 3-pointers. That's good, but those by themselves are not enough. You need the steals, or you need something in that group to be more elite as opposed to just like slightly better than average. And he didn't have those things. Would I consider Brogdon with like the last round flyer? I mean, sure, why not? But I don't think that there's a ton of upside there. And I'm sure they're going to try to move him at some point also. And the last new guy in the mix is the new to everybody guy, and that's Alex Sarr, who we only really know what he's done from international play, but he's also a 7-foot slender fellow. He's listed at 7'1", 220, I think, on Basketball Reference right now. So he's not a particularly wide-bodied sort, but he's not going to get pushed around. What's Chet Holmgren? He's probably pretty close to that, right? What's the tail of the tape on Chet? He's also 7'1". Is he 220? He's 210. So Sarr is listed about 10 pounds heavier than Holmgren, which doesn't exactly make him a thick fellow. He also only played about 17 minutes per game with Perth last year. Big time steals and blocks upside. Has the opportunity to put up some okay field goal percent numbers because he's not a great outside shooter and he'll do some damage on the interior. But if Valanciunas is in there clogging up the middle, then that pushes Sarr a little farther from the basket. Rebounding is fine. I mean, he's 7'1", so he's going to get some. But the appeal with Sarr is just that you're like, all right, this dude's going to be out on the court long enough where, you know, he's not a god-awful foul shooter. He's 71% last year, so it's not good, but he's not going to break you there. He could be okay at field goal, and then you're hoping for some points, boards, steals, and blocks. I would definitely give it a look because everybody wants Cooper Flagg. Washington's going to be terrible. They'll have every reason to play the young guy. They might even have a reason to play him down the stretch. And you guys know my stance on rookies has softened in recent years. Basically, I say, okay, I'm willing to at least look at bigger dudes. But here's the thing. I'm pretty much never drafting a rookie inside the top 100. Those ones tend to go poorly. I don't know where Sarr's going to go in drafts this year, but if he's going inside the top 100, I'm likely not doing it because coming out of the gates, he's probably going to be well outside of that. And then your hope is that over the course of the season, he gets to do more and more as the Wizards either trade bodies away or shut them down, or Sarr just gets more confident. By the way, a reminder and a good one from Matt in the chat room that he was terrible during Summer League, but I try not to read too much into that stuff anyway. He's going to be bad out of the gate. He has a chance to be good by mid to late season. Would I sit on him? Again, only if I can get him late enough. And if I'm choosing between Valanciunas and Sarr, I'm going Valanciunas. If I'm choosing between Brogdon and Sarr, I might go Sarr and then, try to hope that I'm going to get some sort of mega pop-off late in the year. And if I'm starting to incorporate the regulars on this team, then things get real hairy. Because the hope for this coming season was that Jordan Poole would be more like end-of-season Jordan Poole. And end-of-season Jordan Poole was exciting because end-of-season Jordan Poole was the point guard. He did his big-time damage when Tyus Jones was basically done for the year. Effectively the last month of the season. The last month, when Jordan Poole had the ball in his hands, he was taking 18 shots a game. He averaged 21 points and 7 assists. I don't think Kuzma barely played during that stretch. He only played 6 games over that haul, and his efficiency was truly terrible. But if you're looking at a Jordan Poole bounce back season, your hope is that he becomes more of a primary ball handler, that the team sort of becomes more his this season. And I don't know that we can necessarily guarantee that. The removal of Tyus Jones and Denny Avdia does clear a little bit of an obstacle or two out of the way for Poole, but bringing in Brogdon replaces one of those two obstacles. And Kyle Kuzma not being moved yet leaves arguably the biggest roadblock in the way. The guy who takes most of the shots when he's healthy, that's Kuzma. Jordan Poole is going to come down entirely to where he's getting drafted this year. And unfortunately, I don't have the first flying flipping clue where that's going to be. Because last year, remember when drafts opened in August of last season, Poole had a pre-rank in the 60s. And when that came out, I do remember saying I'm mildly intrigued by Poole in the 60s. Because I thought, all right, well, the spend like a 6th round pick on him. If it goes to pot, it's not the worst thing in the universe. I can probably come back from that. And what if everything breaks his way and he becomes like a 2nd rounder? And then over the course of draft season, everybody was like, oh, he's going to take 30 shots a game. I guess I better go draft Poole at 40. And then I was out. Because the floor was way too low. And you've now squeezed the ceiling so tight on him. But you got to believe that everybody that drafted Poole last year isn't going to want to have anything to do with him again this season. So Jordan feels like the kind of guy that will get drafted a solid, I would think, 2 to 3 rounds later this season than last season. Maybe more. And if he's going in that 75 range, I think I could make an okay case for it, even if, again, the first half of the year might not be all that much fun. Remember, he finished at number 135 overall because he was sitting like near 160 for most of the year until guys went down. So Jones out, Avdia out, Brogdon in, Valanciunas in, and Sarr in. There is no guarantee that Poole gets to do more this season. In fact, if anything, it almost seems like guys are going to do less, fewer shots. They sent out 20. And they probably brought in about 20 plus the number 2 pick in the draft. Plus, who knows? Do they want to develop Coulibaly at some point? Is Corey Kispert going to continue to get any playing time? What's going to happen with Marvin Bagley? You got a lot of things to worry about there. So Jordan Poole, 75 or later is where you look at it. Where I would look to draft him would be closer to 90. But again, I don't have a clue. Like, he may have pissed people off so much that he actually does fall that far. I don't know. I don't know. But I am genuinely worried about what the beginning of the season brings, unless they're like, all right, Jordan, you get to initiate the offense. But it's going to become obvious so quickly that the offense will run better when Malcolm Brogdon starts it. Just the way they figured it out this season when Tyus Jones initiated offense. This team was not competitive when Kuzma and Poole were trading off starting offensive possessions. It was so ugly. It was trade-off ball, which is like what the Clippers did with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, but those two guys are two of the best basketball players on earth. And then the Wizards are like, let's do that, but with Kuzma and Poole. Surprise, surprise. They got smoked every night. And then Kuzma, who, you know, we talked a bunch about Paolo Banchero on the last episode of the show. They're very similar in their fantasy makeup, meaning they're going to be way more valuable in points leagues than they are in 9-cat. And I get it. Some people look at that and they're like, this is why 9-cat is dumb. I look at a player like Russell Westbrook, who had seasons where he was shooting like 42% on 22 shots a game and 61% at the free throw line with 5 turnovers, and thought, yeah, I mean, maybe you should get punished for that a little bit. I personally like the nuance of 9-category leagues. I like the fact that a guy like Kyle Kuzma goes out there and goes chucking away from the field, and there's a negative impact associated with that. When he's just firing away, missing shots and turning it over, that's a negative. That's a negative for his team. So it's a negative for my fantasy basketball team. Is it weighted improperly? That's up to you guys. That's something where we can argue until the end of time, until we turn blue in the face. In 9-category leagues, every category is weighted the same amount. So given that, Kuzma being as inefficient as he is at 3 categories, the percentages and turnovers, by the way, not as awful as usual. He was okay in them last year. Counterweights the good stuff by too much. Similarly with Banchero, who we just talked about. The bad outweighs the good for fantasy in category leagues. Obviously, Kyle Kuzma, obviously Paolo Banchero, and so many other players out there in points leagues, they have a different kind of appeal. But if you're playing 9-cat, the bad outweighs the good. Kuzma is better than league average in points, a little bit in threes, a little bit in rebounds and assists. He is sub-average in steals. He is close to league average in blocks. He is well below league average in field goal percent and turnovers. And he's slightly below league average in free throw percent. When you roll that all together, he ended up as number 114 last year. I don't know. I mean, obviously, similarly with Banchero, depending on what you're punting, this type of stuff changes. I happen to be someone who doesn't really like to lock in a punt before a draft begins. And Roto, I basically try not to punt at all on draft night. In head-to-head, depending on what pick I get in the first, who I get in the first round or first 2 rounds, that might solidify it. Like if I ended up going Jokic and then someone else who doesn't hit threes or block shots, then you sort of have a punt figured out at that point. But I rarely go into a draft thinking, oh, I'm definitely going to punt field goal percent so I can target Kyle Kuzma later in the draft. It's something where if the chips fall that way, then I would consider it. But he's not a target because before my draft starts, I'm not married to any particular build. Does that make sense? I get it. They're going to be a lot. There was someone that I forget who it was that watched all the shows. It was playful. It was playful. There was no bad blood there. But he and I used to argue about Kyle Kuzma every day and how I was like, look, I'm still not interested. But it's because I was talking about a whole bunch. I had 10 or 11 teams rolling last year, and I don't think any of them was punting field goal percent. Maybe one of them. So one of my teams, I was like, oh, yeah, that Kuzma would fit all right on that club. I think I might have even had Kuzma on that team. But if you weren't, then I didn't. So by and large, and like, here's the thing. This time of year, beginning of August right now, August 1st, we can get into the pedantic weeds on this type of discussion. We can talk about Kyle Kuzma and we can illustrate all the little things that go on with his fantasy value. But when I'm trying to speed run our way into draft season, or even after that, I have to be a bit more concise in my analysis. I have to be able to say, this is a player I'm not really interested in, without also having to add, okay, if you're playing in this particular format, you can take a look at him. If you're in this format, you can take a look at him. If you're punting this, and the other thing, you can take a look at him. You guys are going to have to make that adjustment yourself a little bit on some of this stuff. Right now, I can do it because we got all the time in the world. I can operate on my own schedule. There are no games happening tonight, so it's not like I have to get this analysis to you before the next slate of games begins. Right now, I can say all of that stuff, but come October, we're going to have to be a little bit quicker. So let's roll that all together. What do we take away from the Wizards? Possible value targets. Jonas Valanciunas. I think probably the most underdrafted player in this group. And again, we may have some more pre-ranked data in a week from now, but he would be a guy I'd be looking at as a possible target. Malcolm Brogdon would be a very late flyer type where you're like, maybe he could crawl his way into that top 100 range, but probably not. Jordan Poole likely falls a lot farther in drafts this year than last year, but is it far enough? That's one that we're going to be watching for a lot at the beginning and then end of draft season to see where he ends up. Kuzma, we know what to do. You know what to do with Kuzma. If you got a particular build or if you're in a particular league setting, that's the way to go. Who the hell am I forgetting? Alex Sarr is the other one in that group. Wouldn't take him before very, very late in drafts. There is some upside built in that you might see click over the course of a season, but you're probably going to be sitting on a bad asset for a while. And that, I believe, is all the names of relevance on the Washington Wizards. I once again forgot to say, now we're going to take a commercial break in the middle of the show. Someday I'll remember. That day is not today. Twice I screwed that up today. Anyway, the commercials probably happened if you're listening on one of the traditional pod channels. They happened somewhere in there, and so I'm sorry that I didn't get them in. Please do like, rate, and subscribe. I'm just going to say it 2 or 3 times every episode because it's so freaking critically important right now, especially here in the month of August as we begin to ramp up towards the season. Yahoo Leagues could again be open in as little as 1 week from today. I am Dan Bespris. I am also at Old Man Squad. Those are the 2 Twitter handles. Make sure to follow them. Old Man Squad will follow you back. Make sure to, again, retweet and leave reviews and do all that good stuff. And we'll be back with you tomorrow. Once again, we'll probably do 2 separate shows again tomorrow because time is easier and it's easier for me to rest my voice a little bit in between them. And I think we were able to actually go a little bit longer on each team when I didn't feel like I needed to mash them into like a 45, 50-minute show. So better or worse, that's the way it's going right now. I'm hoping I can continue to record a few to drop early next week. Remember, I will be out of town Monday and Tuesday of next week. So if a show drops in there, it's because I got my act together and pre-recorded that wildness. If not, then so be it. Either way, I'm Dan. You're awesome. We'll see you guys tomorrow.